Yeah, it started.
Yeah. So, I'm Shabnam Hashmi from Anhad, and I welcome all of you to the second webinar of the series called Democracy in Crisis. Anhad has started this webinar series 15 days ago, and we plan to do a webinar every 15 days. So, this is the second of the series, and looking at the situation internationally and in Palestine, we decided to do the second webinar on genocide in Gaza and the democratic world. We grew up, if I'm talking about myself and people of my age, we grew up in an India which was after we attained freedom, which was not only uh, progressing and building the country, but also celebrating democratic struggles across the world. I remember as a child, at least three or four international leaders who were daily names in our households: Nelson Mandela, Fidel Castro, and Yasser Arafat. And I think our generation, all of us, heard about them, knew about them, celebrated their struggles, participated in a lot of solidarity programs for these countries fighting the apartheid in South Africa, fighting for the struggle of the Palestinian people. And unfortunately, today we stand in a situation where India, I'm not talking about people of India, but India, the state of India, is, instead of standing with the people of Palestine, instead of condemning the genocide, it is actively supporting Israel by sending people to work there, by providing all kinds of logistical support, by providing arms um, and doing various kind of treaties with them. And I feel ashamed that India has reached this state. And I want to, on behalf of us, apologize to Palestinians that we have not been able to stand with you in a way that we have stood all our lives. There have been many, many attempts to do big demonstrations in support of Palestine, and large number of them have been stopped. There are constant efforts to come out in support of the Palestinian people, but most of it is curbed. Uh, the national television network, which is totally controlled by the government, of course, does not talk about it. But on social media, there are a lot of people who are supporting, who are speaking, who are condemning what is happening and what Israel is doing. And I want to convey through you, Wafa, to the people of Palestine that there are artists, academicians, intellectuals, ordinary people who will continue to stand with you, with Palestinian people, and we will try and keep doing whatever is possible for us. Uh, what is happening in India is, uh, I won't say it is shocking, because the kind of forces that have engulfed India, uh, unfortunately, we do not expect anything else from them. Back in 2002, over 22, 23 years ago, when I was documenting what was happening in Gujarat, what is called the Gujarat genocide, talking to the gang rape survivors, talking to the victims, the stories were horrendous. And if somebody who was the chief minister at that time, overseeing what happened in Gujarat in 2002, is now the prime minister of this country, then I don't think that democratic secular people can expect anything else from him or his political party and the larger political forces which have occupied India. But we continue to fight for restoring democracy in this country, and we will continue to uh, stand with the people of Palestine and as well as all democratic struggles across the world. Today's webinar will be chaired by Professor Aditya Mukherjee, who is a very well-known historian and a writer. Aditya Mukherjee retired as Professor of Contemporary History from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was elected General President of the Indian History Congress 2023-24 and has been visiting professor and fellow at premier institutions across many countries, including the Duke University in USA, University of Tokyo, University of Rome, Institute of Advanced Studies, France. He has written many books. His latest book was released recently, which is called Nehru's India. So I will hand it over to Professor Aditya Mukherjee to conduct this session. Uh, the We will be switching off the videos and audios of all the participants except the speakers during this period till all the speakers have spoken. During the question and answer session, they will be opened again and anybody can ask their questions and the speakers will be here to respond to them. So thank you very much again for joining this webinar. And this will be today conducted in English only because Wafa has joined us from Palestine. And if we speak in Hindi, then she won't be able to follow. So we would try and do it only in English. Thank you very much. Over to you, Professor Mukherjee.
Thank you, Shabnam. I must, to begin with, thank Shabnam and Anhad for taking on the responsibility of this series called Democracy in Crisis, and in which today, as she said, we shall discuss the genocide in Gaza and the democratic world. We should have said genocide in Gaza and the silence and the collusion of the democratic world in what is happening there. There are three very distinguished speakers on the panel who will speak about it. All of them have raised their voice in their own fields on this question, and we will all learn a lot, I believe, from what they have to say. But before that, I'll just make some introductory comments. I think this webinar series on democracy in crisis in India, in crisis, is of extreme importance in India. As Shabnam said, day by day, we are witnessing an erosion of the democratic system in India, which was, after all, a product of a long and painful struggle, freedom struggle of our freedom fighters. The values of that freedom struggle were enshrined in our constitution, and we are now finding them being uprooted one by one. The world, as you are aware, no longer accepts, to our great shame, India as a democracy, as a full democracy. The categorization now used in the world democratic world, in the Global Democracy Index, is India is called an electoral autocracy, just one step away from a full autocracy. This decline in our ranking is due to the increasing attack on our free speech, on free press, the right to association, all very critical elements of both of our freedom movement and of our constitution. And also because of the attack on civil society organizations, NGOs, and most importantly, on the targeted attack on our minorities, particularly the Muslims. So much so that even the Punjab and Haryana High Court was constrained to take so much cognizance of the attack on the minorities and state the following. It wondered whether, under the guise of law and order problem, an exercise of ethnic cleansing is being conducted by the Indian state. So this brings us, so we are not very far from what is happening elsewhere in the world. So this brings us to the discussion on the ongoing genocide or ethnic cleansing going on in Gaza. We must remember that democratic freedom, like other essential values, human values, are not divisible. We cannot say that it doesn't matter what is happening in one part of the country, say Kashmir or Manipur, doesn't matter, we will have democracy elsewhere. It doesn't happen like that. Similarly, if democracy is denied in any other part of the world, we do not speak up, then not only are we not keeping up our human responsibilities, we are indeed ensuring that our own democracies will not survive over time. We must, I would like to point out as a historian that our freedom fighters, from the very beginning, when they fought against British imperialism, they said that the fight is not only against British imperialism, but against imperial domination anywhere in the world, against any people. As early as the 1930s, much before our independence, Jawaharlal Nehru was critical of British intervention in Palestine through the Balfour Declaration of 1917, promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And as he said, as if Palestine, nobody lived in Palestine. A new state was being created within a state by British imperialism. I'm quoting Nehru. England pit Jewish religious nationalism against Arab nationalism and made it appear that their presence was necessary to act as an arbiter to keep peace between the two. The same old imperialist argument. Exactly the same was done in India. Imperialism, wherever it has gone, has left behind the longest legacy of a divided people. And this is what they did in India, pitted the religious nationalism of Muslims, which we call communalism, against Indian nationalism, so that the anti-imperialist movement would be weakened and British rule could continue. Nehru was very clear. The problem of Palestine is essentially a nationalist one. A people, Christian, Muslims included, struggling for their independence from imperialism-aided occupation. It is not a racial or religious question. It is a problem of a nationalist project for freedom. One more word before I call in the panel about what the father of our nation, Gandhiji, had to say on the Palestine problem. Gandhiji says, again, as early as 1938, he says he is very sympathetic to the Jews for the inhuman treatment meted out to them, like what he compares it to the inhuman treatment the Hindus in India give to the untouchables or the Dalits. But he said, sympathy does not blind me to the requirement of justice. Palestine belongs to the Arabs. It would be a crime against humanity to reduce the proud Arabs so that Palestine can be restored to the Jews, partly or wholly as their national home. The nobler course would be to insist on a just treatment of the Jews wherever they are born and bred. The Jews, whatever the atrocities inflicted on them by Germany and others, cannot occupy Palestine as their national home, entering it under the shadow of British guns. They can settle in Palestine only by the goodwill of the Arabs. And as Shabnam said, after independence, consistently, we all grew up with that. Consistently, India stood up for the Palestinian cause. But alas, our country has begun to slip both on the democracy index and on the index of sovereignty vis-a-vis the imperial powers. And the denouement is that, as was mentioned, not only are we not silent when what is going on in Gaza, we are actually appear to be colluding with Israel in allowing this to happen. All that we can do, the minimum we can do is first to raise our voices against what this evil that is happening. I would like to now invite the speakers. Wafa will speak first. Wafa Abdul Rahman was born in Gaza. Her family is still in Gaza, faced with the unbelievable, inhuman conditions that the Gazan people are being subjected to. She's a notable figure in the Palestinian media and women's advocacy. She's the founder and general director of Philistiniat, Media for Women and Youth in Ramallah, the founder of the Palestinian Female Journalist Club, which connects female journalists in Gaza and the West Bank, and the editor-in-chief of Nawa, the feminist news agency. Her organization, Philistiniat, received the World Press Freedom Hero Award for its reporting in events in Gaza. I heard her speak recently, and her lamenting as well as hoping that it is not just an award, but that the world press would also begin to speak up on this question. Over to you, Wafa.
Great. Good evening, and thank you for having me. I wish to start with a note, and thank you for the introduction and putting the historical context into the Palestinian Indian relation and history. When I first received the invitation, I actually didn't hesitate for 1 second, and I accepted immediately. Why? Because I wanted to connect with the Indian audience. And I wanted to convey a message of frustration. Palestinians don't really understand what has happened between the old India, the Gandhi India, the Nehru India, and Modi India, who has enlisted himself and a massive digital army against Palestinians, a massive digital army that is spreading misinformation and attacking the Palestinians and their narrative, siding by the Israeli occupation. Palestinians don't really understand because all what they see on social media is not your voices. And I know there are a lot of voices that stand by Palestinians and their rights to self-determination and freedom, justice, and all that. What we see is this huge digital army that is attacking us. And we keep talking to the new generation and to our activists, like, this is not India. India is a continent. The government is not India. And this is why, for me, it was very important to come and talk to you. And I know the people who are here, they know about Palestine. They follow the news. I don't have to convey the numbers of people who have been killed in this genocide. It's different than talking to Western media and Western audience, because we have this historic bound between us. And this is, again, why I wasn't hesitant for a second. I wanted to reconnect. And I do believe we have a lot in common. And despite Modi and his government and his not only complicit in the genocide, but he's part of this genocide committed against Palestinians in Gaza in particular. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you for having me with you, and thank you for all the people who came to attend this session. And as it was pointed out when I was reading, this is genocide in Gaza and the democratic world. It's another thing that really stopped me. I wish to correct the title of this session to be Genocide in Gaza and the Democratic World Myth, because it's a myth. What we've seen, what we've experienced in Gaza is the failure of the world order. It's the failure of the so-called democracies. And for us, we felt we've been betrayed by everybody, by the media, by the feminist movement, by the secular voices who would amplify a hashtag and a campaign like Me Too, but they wouldn't care about the sexual violence and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, as if we're not humans. So start again. Yes, I was born in Gaza. My family is still there. And because this is not a news bulletin, I wish to share 2 days of my life. Yesterday and today. Yesterday, I woke up on the news that talks about Israeli army bombing a place where children and women were waiting to get supplements and vitamins in this starvation that is used as an Israeli weapon against Palestinians. And 15 people were killed, 10 children, 3 women. And the first thing that came to my mind was my mother. My mother is 84 years old. In the past 130 days, she relies on dry milk, which is scarce in Gaza, bread, which is again very scarce in Gaza, and for my brothers to keep her health okay, they actually mix it with vitamins and supplements. So I was really scared. It might be my sister-in-law that is standing in the row to get the supplements for my mother. And I started calling, and the connection wasn't that good until I got hold of them. Okay, I was relaxed. It wasn't my family that were killed. But that doesn't make me happy because those who were murdered and killed, they're also mothers and sisters and beloved by a family, and they're waiting not actually for any kind of aid, but vitamins and supplements, which makes it really worse. It means that they have children who are starving. When we're talking about the 10 children, the youngest of them is 2 years old and the oldest is 13. Today, I also couldn't sleep. The bombing on Gaza is nonstop, is very intensified since Netanyahu is in the US, since there are talks about a ceasefire. And we know that every time they talk about ceasefire, they intensify the attacks and the bombings. So I was, of course, following the different groups, journalistic groups, and just getting first images, like raw images of those who were killed, and then 10 to 4 a.m. we get this message from the medical staff at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, who were actually sending this message to the journalists, asking them to talk about them, and that the Israeli tanks are few meters away from the hospital, and reminding the journalists, please talk about us, we're not numbers. Tell the world that we decided to stay. Okay, we were all scared, because then it means this is like one of the only hospitals that is serving the people in the south. And for Palestinian, we have a workstation, sleepover station for our women journalists in Khan Yunis that is very close to the hospital, um, and that was very early in the morning. I'm not sure if they will be able to evacuate or we will lose more journalists. Since the beginning of genocide, we have lost 45 women journalists. We have lost almost 240 journalists as a total who were targeted by the Israelis. And honestly, it's not because I'm from Gaza, but I've been working in Gaza since 2009. And like I know majority of the journalists on a personal basis. They're my friends, they're my colleagues. They're doing an amazing job to document the war crimes, to document and to tell the world. And in certain points, they feel yes, the world is deaf and dumb and blind, that doesn't see them, yet they continue to report. And I feel guilty if I don't work every day because I live in Ramallah. I'm not under direct attack, so I'm privileged in a way or another. They are under genocide and they're working 24 hours and they're running for their lives and they're providing for their families, yet they insist on reporting to us and telling us lots of stories that you don't see in the mainstream media, whether in the Western media or even in the Arab media. I don't see what they send to us in the closed groups. And then you feel you have this responsibility to be their voice to the world. So today, yeah, I slept for like 4 hours, trying to check on everybody, at least in Khan Yunis. That doesn't mean that the north is safe, and actually lots of massacres are happening. For the past 130 days, it's almost 100 people get killed by the Israelis on daily basis. You think death is the end, you think there is rest in death, but then you're faced with the truth that our people don't have any graveyards to bury their beloved ones. And even when they are put to rest, as the world might know the grave is the final rest, like today morning, the Israelis, they invaded the cemetery in Khan Yunis. They digged the remains of the human bodies that were there in mass graves, and they took them. And people are like just sending messages and questioning if the graves of their beloved ones were digged and what happened to the remains of the bodies. So like when you look at every aspect, when I say genocide, I don't feel the concept itself could really reflect what is happening with the Palestinians. Yes, I learned about the different genocides in the world, but when I look at Gaza, it's like every kind of genocide is there, and it's the mission of people from different languages, linguistics, literature. I don't know. We have to come up with a new terminology to describe what is there in Gaza. How this is happening in a democracy. It's been 640 days, and the Gazans, they say every day is a blood. Every minute is a blood. It's not the normal time that we pass as humans. For Gazans, no. Every minute sounds like a year of death, starvation, losing hope in the world. They're losing all that, and we look at the governments. We don't have hope in the governments, but we have hope in the people and the grassroots movements. And for those who are fighting for justice and humanity, we look at the media, we see how we are dehumanized, we see the asymmetry of coverage, we see how the victims are blamed, we see the omission of context, as if the genocide has started on October 7th, dismissing 75 plus years of occupation and 18 plus years of blockade over Gaza, silence and war crimes, censorship and suppression of pro-Palestinian voices, parroting the Israeli narrative, repeating the Israeli propaganda, smearing critics, and the double standards of coverage, where we're not blondes, we don't have green eyes, we're simply brown and black. So our lives don't really matter. But for us, no. For us, every one of us, every life that has been lost matters, because each one of those martyrs has a life, has hopes, has family, despite the fact many families are wiped from the face of the earth. But we hold them, we carry them, we try to talk about them, not as numbers, but when we have to talk about almost 60,000 people, it's really very hard job. Yet, when I'm very depressed, I talk to my family, I talk to my friends and colleagues in Gaza, and they lift my spirits up. I don't know how they do it, but they can do that. From them, I get the hope, and from them, I get the energy to keep going and to talk and keep talking, because this is the main message they ask everybody to do. Don't forget Gaza. Keep talking about Gaza. Keep talking about its people. For those who ever been in Gaza, for those who ever been in touch with Gazans, they're very hospitable. They're very life-loving people. They're very funny. They make fun of everything. They're cynical in lots of ways. They endured a situation that no human being can endure, and yet they stand up, they come up with lots of initiatives to support their own community. They have wonderful young people who are fighting life because they love it, not because they want to lose it. The stereotype of Gazans is unbearable. They're generous, they're open-minded, they're very creative, they're hardworking people. Despite the blockade, they have done lots of amazing job in maintaining even their well-being. So to conclude, this is a genocide, it's not a conflict. Israel must be held accountable. Modi must be held accountable together with the rest of the Western governments that are allowing war criminals to pass through their countries, and they enjoy all the support from those Western governments. Banning military aid to Israel is a must. Boycotting the Israeli companies and those who are complicit is also a must. But again and again and again, keep talking about Gaza. Even if you are the only people who are talking, it means a lot to us. Reach out to the Gazans, listen to them, and I'm sure we have a lot in common. We have the history, and I'm sure we have the future ahead of us where Indians and Palestinians will come together to defeat Modi and his government and to defeat the apartheid Israel and the genocide Israel towards right to self-determination for Palestinians and justice for us, for every people who are looking for justice, whether in India, Palestine, and Sudan, and Yemen, and the rest of the world. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wafa, for bringing to us the fact that it is not just a genocide, that it is so much more that is involved. And I assure you that, and I appreciate the fact that the people of this country are with the people of Gaza, of Palestine, as they have been in the past and shall continue to be in the future. And I share your hope that we shall overcome and overthrow the regimes which enable this horror, this undescribable horror, and the fall of humanity to such low levels that such people, such regimes shall be removed. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite Professor Aftab Kamal Pasha, my colleague for several years and a friend from JNU. JNU, by the way, Wafa, is one of the quote-unquote anti-national universities, which raises voices which the government does not like. And all the other speakers today have a link to that university. So you can guess what you're going to hear. Professor Pasha is a very prominent Indian academic specializing in international relations and particularly with a focus on West Asia and North Africa. He's a professor and director of the Gulf Studies program at the Center for West Asian Studies. He also served as chairperson there. Dr. Pasha has held positions at Aligarh Muslim University, served as director of the Maulana Azad Center for Indian Culture in Cairo, was a research fellow at Cairo University. He's also associated with the Gulf Research Center in Dubai. His work focuses on Gulf, West Asia, and North Africa. He has authored, edited, and co-edited over 60 books and numerous articles. He frequently writes in the press and expresses his opinion boldly and freely in the media, and we look forward to hearing him today. Professor Pasha.
Thank you, Professor Aditya Mukherjee, for giving me this opportunity to share my views on a very important topic, genocide in Gaza, the democratic world. Let me just share a few historical facts so that our viewers who are well aware of the current situation unfolding for nearly 2 years in Gaza and the broader West Asian region. I must start with the discrimination of Jews which prevailed in much of the present-day democratic world, Western world, for nearly 2 centuries. 2,000 years, sorry, 2,000 years from across the continent, England, the mother of democracy, to Spain, to Germany, France, and much of the present EU. The Jews were not only discriminated and persecuted, but they were despised and so inhumanly treated that many of them fled to the Arab Islamic world, particularly the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Arab empires flourished from Iran to Turkey to the Damascus, Baghdad, and the Egyptian capitals. And in most of this Arab Islamic empires, the Jews were prominent because they were considered people of the book, and they prospered and they contributed a lot for trade and commerce. In fact, the much of the trade, import-export trade in these empires was in the hands of the Jews, as is recorded in history by several authors from the democratic world. So this democratic world, which discriminated the Jews, and prominent among them the British, in order to bring down the Ottoman Empire in the First World War, promised the Jews a homeland in Palestine which did not belong to the British. It was sovereign, under sovereign control of the Ottoman Empire. But nevertheless, they issued this letter to the Jews about a homeland. And they did everything possible after the war through the League of Nations and the mandate system to enable, through their administration, the mandated British administration in Palestine, first to say separate the eastern part and create the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan as a reward for the rebellion against the Ottoman Empire, and the remaining part of Palestine was enabled for the Jews to emigrate, and they bought up, the wealthy Jews bought up land even before the Nazi atrocities, and slowly began displacement. And the Palestinians inhabitants protested, and what is known as the Palestinian Revolt in the 1920s was violently crushed by the British. Hundreds and thousands of Palestinian activists, leaders, religious leaders were hanged, they were banished, they were tortured, and all sorts of atrocities were committed on the Palestinians in the 20s. And in the 30s, unable to crush the Palestinian nationalism, the British came up with a lot of ideas about partition, Palestine, so on and so forth. But nevertheless, they continued to crush the Palestinians. And at the same time, prepare the Jews towards the 30s, late 30s, for an army of the Jews to participate in the British Overseas Empire defense forces. And it is this which provoked our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, even before he became Prime Minister. Let me just quote two things. In a speech delivered in London in July 1938, he said, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, "This problem of Palestine is a peculiar problem, and we are apt to think of it too much in terms of conflict between the Arabs and the Jews. May I remind you," that is the British audience, "to begin with, that right through 2000 years, there has never been any real conflict between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine. It is a problem which has recently arisen since the war, that is the First World War. It is fundamentally a problem created by British imperialism in Palestine, and unless you keep that in mind, you will not solve it." So clear, abundantly clear. And in the next year, at the 52nd session in 1939 at Tripura, the Indian National Congress recalled its earlier resolution and British atrocities against the Palestinian. It said, The courage, the determination, and sacrifices made by the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs in the struggle, have evoked the admiration of people of India who desire to convey to them again their feelings and good wishes for the complete success in the attainment of their objective. So the Congress leaders, the freedom movement leaders in India were absolutely clear. And it is this which prompted Jawaharlal Nehru after India at the United Nations in 1947 to support a federal state, the unitary state. And that is how we voted against partition resolution in November 1947 against the United Nations. And that came to be known as the Minority Plan. Nevertheless, the United Nations passed through Resolution 181 in 1947 the creation of two states, a Palestinian state and a Arab state, which never saw the light of the day. And soon after, the war broke out and the Jews occupied more Palestinian land and hundreds and thousands were expelled. And the people in Gaza now actually fled those villages and towns which became Israel in 1948 and subsequent years. And they have lived as refugees in the Gaza Strip since 1948. And this has continued in the shape of the occupation of Sinai in 1956 during the Suez War, then again in 1973, the October War, and then of course 67 war which Israel occupied Sinai. So all these wars which Israel has waged against the Palestinians and the neighboring Arab state have led to the multiplication of refugees from original Palestine, and they have fled to not only the neighboring countries of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and the wider Arab world, but to all known parts of the world. You can find Palestinian refugees all over the world who are sometimes stateless citizens or otherwise. The genocide which has been unfolding for the last 20 plus months, it is a continuation of the genocide which the British initiated and which the British took over the Israelis took over in 1948. And subsequently, the United States became the main sponsor from 1965 onwards of what Israel has been doing and perpetuating against the Palestinians. The mistreatment and persecution, jailing of them, and denying their identity, the right to self-determination, and everything. At the United Nations, United States has vetoed any number of resolutions in the Security Council. That is the only state which is preventing the emergence of a Palestinian state. Hundreds of resolutions in the General Assembly have been passed, and any resolution on Palestine attracts nearly 150 votes out of the 193. So the democratic world, which facilitated the emergence of Israel after the First World War in the background of Nazi atrocities, is now witnessing the Israeli genocide, Holocaust, and extermination of the Palestinian people. It is nothing short of extermination of an entire population of a country, which is happening not only in Gaza, but day in and day out in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem particularly, and in West Bank. Hundreds and thousands have been expelled from their houses, from the refugee camps, from the villages, the Bedouins, etc. So the war of extermination is being highlighted in Gaza, but at the same time, silently, the Israelis are occupying not only the villages and towns, but expelling them who have lived in these towns for thousands of years. So the democratic world is now obsessed with what happened on 7th of October 2023, which from all independent accounts was facilitated by Netanyahu, because he removed the army from the Gaza border. He took away the weapons from the mayors and the Israeli settlers who were near the Gaza border. And there was a vacuum deliberately created for the entry of the Hamas, so that this and the Hannibal doctrine, which enabled the Israeli defense forces to kill their own people near the border. So in that way, Netanyahu has used the October 7 events to continue the genocide, the extermination policy in Gaza, and also invaded Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and Iran, in which the United States also participated. So the democratic world is not only preventing the condemnation and stoppage of the extermination and genocide in Gaza, but all its media, all the channels support the genocide, the killing of the Palestinians and starving of them, and the rules-based order, has double standards. On the one hand, they hold Putin as a criminal from the ICC, and the same ICC, when it holds Netanyahu as a criminal, this criminal is invited by the U.S. Congress, the most important power, democratic power in the world, is invited. The Congress invites this criminal Netanyahu, and there is a standing ovation. At least 20 times, the members of the House of Representatives and Senate stand up and clap in favor of Netanyahu. And now this ICC declared criminal also recommends the US President for the Nobel Peace Prize. See the irony of the democratic world, how they are undermining the democratic structures, the so-called rules-based order, the United Nations, the defiance of the world public opinion. Every day there are demonstrations in all of this democratic world. So you have a situation where there are double standards practiced by UK, France, Germany, and the United States, Canada, who supply day in and day out weapons to the state of Israel and in the continuation of the genocide. And the extension of this bombing by these democratic forces to Yemen, to Iran, and other parts of this region. So not only they are undermining democracy and the forces which support the Palestinian struggle in the universities, colleges, civil service. Just to give you one instance, in Texas, I've been visiting for the last 4 or 5 years. This Texas State Assembly has passed a resolution whereby if you criticize Israel, if you attack Israel, your pension can be withheld, your children can be denied health care, and in fact, in some cases, you can be arrested. So this is the level to which US states have gone to domesticate the support for Israel, and this spreads across much of the United States. So they have formalized and regularized the American support to the state of Israel and what it is doing, and legitimizing that it is in the national interest of the United States. Such is the duplicitous nature of their democratic liberal world. And the small attempts to have democracy in the region, whether it is the election by the Egyptian people of Mohammed Morsi through the first election, free and fair election, he was overthrown by a military dictator, which is now supported by the democratic world. And now we have a president in Syria who was a declared terrorist of the Islamic State, now being welcomed by the democratic world, and he's in the good books of the democratic world. Whereas whatever little democracy Iran has since 1971 after the overthrow of the Shah, they are trying to overthrow the regime there by using the nuclear issue as the pretext. And when Kuwait was liberated from the clutches of Saddam Hussein, the opposition leader in Kuwait asked George Bush why he is not supporting the democratic forces in Kuwait. And his answer was that this war of liberation was not fought for democracy. It was to restore the monarchy. And in the same breath, he said, we are not supporting democratic forces because these monarchs are allies and they are reliable allies, and we continue to support them. And Donald Trump, when he visited during his first administration, Riyadh, he went back and he said, if the United States doesn't support the Saudi kingdom, it will be overthrown in a week's time. I'm quoting him. Just in 10 days, the Saudi monarchy will be overthrown by their own people. He didn't refer to the military. He just said people will come to the streets and overthrow the monarchy. So any feeble attempt to have civil society or democracy in the region is also prevented by these democratic forces or the upholders of democracy. They try to promote democracy in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya. We know what has happened there. So the less said, the better about the democratic world, which is now well known. The U.S. aid has been used to not to promote democracy, but to work for the overthrow of the regimes or administrations which have been trying to democratize their political systems in the global south. So let us now come to the state of Israel as a liberal democracy, which is being taunted in the Western world that is the only democracy in a sea of despotism, monarchies, authoritarian dictators, so on and so forth. President Carter became the first American to call Israel an apartheid state. And we should recall that his heroic attempts to bring Egypt and Israel and enable the peace accords through the Camp David Accords in 1978-79. It was he who branded Israel as an apartheid state, and he condemned the discrimination, persecution, and expulsion of the Palestinian people. And anyone who raises the voice in favor of the Palestinian people is ostracized and criticized. And any congressman or any senator who supports the Palestinians loses his seat. Such is the stranglehold of the Jewish lobby. The Wall Street controlled by them, the media, the academic, much of the academic world, and the deep state, CIA, so on and so forth. So the democratic world has actually been taken over by the Zionist forces, and they have projected Israel as an asset to the democratic world, that it is in the national interest of the democratic world to support what Israel is carrying out. And in fact, one defense secretary of the United States, he said Israel is a aircraft carrier. If we did not have Israel, we would have had to create a state like Israel to safeguard our interest, which is mostly commercial arms export and other strategic interests. So no wonder that not only they are undermining the international law, the Geneva Conventions, and the United Nations Charter blatantly by invading Iran or Iraq or other countries and overthrowing the legitimate governments there, but also enabling the death and destruction through Israel, through Gaza, in much of this world. I mean, the entire area lies in ruins. Hundreds and thousands of people have been butchered in Iraq, in Syria, long civil war, 15 years, then Lebanon, several invasions in 78, 82, and continuously. And then, of course, you have the enabling bombings in Yemen and the civil war which is raging in Sudan, which is again supported by the Israelis and the West through the United Arab Emirates. And much of the North Africa also lies in shambles because of this Zionist project of Greater Israel, which President Trump has enabled by annexing the Golan Heights, the Eastern Jerusalem, shifting of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and now the prospects of occupying much of the Jewish settlements in West Bank. there is talk about almost 45% of West Bank being annexed to Israel, and Trump okaying it, where the Jewish settlements are established. And now both of them, Netanyahu and Trump, are talking about building concentration camps in Rafah and not allowing people to move out of them, and finally persuading Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, or Scandinavian countries to accept these Palestinians. So the democratic world, digging its own grave, so to say, by enabling this genocide, this extermination policy, and helping the greater Israeli project. And shockingly, the painful silence of the Arab regimes complicit in much of this Israeli atrocities, whether it is Jordan or the Gulf states, even Turkey, is a matter of great concern. And like the Arab Spring, people's anger is boiling because of the daily atrocities against children, women, the denial of medicine, water, basic necessities of the people. Hundreds and thousands of trucks are waiting on the borders in Egypt. And the Egyptian government also is preventing. So the regimes are tightly controlled through the Zionist lobbies and the Americans, and they are putting pressure on Syria also to take the refugees. So just to conclude, Professor Aditya, let me say that the emergence of a multipolar world, the emergence of BRICS, the disenchantment from South Africa to Brazil to various other countries about this double standards, is now enabling India also, which has developed close ties with the Israelis, and the bond of friendship between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu is getting exposed, because now, except Israel, nobody supported us on this Pahalgam issue or Operation Sindoor, which we carried out against Pakistan. So the friendship is very obvious. We are isolated in the region. We are isolated in a global arena, and all the 33 countries with the parliamentary delegations visited, not a single one supported us. Not a single delegation was received by a top leader, and they had to be content with the meeting NRIs and going for sightseeing and such other things. Such is the dubious reputation of this government in this field of foreign policy, which is isolated, where the Prime Minister now goes to countries to receive the awards. A few years ago, when I was associated with the Ministry of External Affairs as a diplomat, I was told that we are tracking the number of countries which support us on the UN reforms, that we should be member of the Security Council. Now, I'm told in the MEA there is a chart which says which country will invite and give award to the Prime Minister. Such is the level to which we have reached, not in terms of strategic autonomy in our foreign policy, but to enable the embassies to prepare for the award ceremony, for which the Prime Minister is going from Ghana to Cyprus to Brazil to Namibia to every other country, small country, which many people are unaware of. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pasha, for, among so many other things, highlighting to the duplicity of the so-called democratic world led by the US, cynically choosing allies to further imperial interests. And no matter what the regimes they are giving support to do to their own people, whether they are, they're committing genocide or letting loose untold misery on their own people, appears to be of no consequence. And you have also described very well the new low our own foreign policy has reached in the recent years. And from there, we move on to Professor Achin Vanaik. Achin Vanaik is very well known as a journalist, as an activist, and of course, as an academic. He's a retired professor of international relations and former head of the Department of Political Science at Delhi University. He's been a lifelong activist for nuclear disarmament. He's an active member in the Coalition for Nuclear Disarmament and Peace and in the Indian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel, working to pressure Israel to comply with international law. He is the founder of the Society for Marxist Studies, which holds 2-week-long residential schools for postgraduate students and social activists from across India. He is the author of numerous books. I'll just mention one of them. There are several others. The Painful Transition, Bourgeois Democracy in India. I mentioned it because I found it extremely good. I would now invite Professor Vanaik to give his own comments. Achin, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And what I will do is I will divide my presentation into 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk about why the democratic world, or the world of liberal democratic capitalist regimes of varying strength, have been so complicit in this genocide in a way that no other genocide has ever had. Secondly, I'd like to talk about what the Israel and US ambitions and aims are from what they've been doing both in the West Bank and Gaza. And lastly, about how the direction that the Palestinian struggle could possibly take to actually defend themselves and to enhance their prospects of eventual future success. So let me start with this question of why so many supposedly liberal democratic regimes have been complicit with Israel. Professor Pasha has actually very eloquently pointed out many of the reasons for this. Let me put it in this way then. There is all liberal democratic governments are basically controlled by ruling classes, and these governments have political interests, economic interests, ideological ballasts and biases, and the moral question comes down much down the ladder, but it is also important because they like to be able to project to themselves and convince people that they are basically good and decent people, decent country, and so on. But it's way down. The other aspects are, of course, much more important. And we must also recognize that times have greatly changed. And one way of trying to get this across is to recognize that there was an earlier settler colonial apartheid regime, South Africa, and you now have the only remaining settler colonial apartheid regime, which is Israel. And why is it that when you talk about even democratic countries in Europe and elsewhere, when it came with regard to the question of South Africa, they were not as brutal, and they could not be as brutal and as complicit. Of course, they were complicit in many respects, but nowhere near the kind of thing that we're seeing with Israel. Well, we have to recognize that, as Professor Mukherjee also pointed out earlier, after the Second World War, for many decades, was the unfolding of national liberation struggles for independence by various regimes. And that, of course, was a very powerful moral force. And even dictatorships that emerged there could recognize to a certain extent the importance of this moral dimension and would want further national liberation in other places. And this was particularly applicable to South Africa. So you had a number of neighboring countries, African countries, which were ruled by dictatorships. But the only way they could have certain legitimacy in among their own public was, of course, to recognize and support, to not just verbally or politically or diplomatically, but to even a certain extent materially, the struggle against apartheid. Yeah. Another very important factor is for decades after the Second World War, there was a communist bloc. And insofar as the democratic capitalist countries wanted to expand their influence, the existence of such a bloc and its attempt to win over support from other countries in what was called the third world also was a restraining factor with regard to what they could do in South Africa. Another aspect which also makes a very great difference, shows the difference between Israel and South Africa, is the fact that South Africa, you had an overwhelming majority of Black people and a small minority of white and supporting apartheid ruling over that regime. This is not the case in Israel. Moreover, precisely because this was the case there, it meant that other democratic governments could also recognize that if they want to continue in this process of having their political relationship and their economic relationships with any regime in South Africa, and given that that's a minority regime ruling over here, they could still maintain those relations of economic prosperity and trade and all the rest of it, even if there was a change in government. Not that they were willing or supporting that change of government, but given the fact that that struggle was much stronger because it was much greater in numbers and because it was much more united, meant that the chances of them succeeding were much, much greater. In the Israeli case, these democratic governments, these governments in the so-called democratic world, don't see any possibility of the Palestinians replacing the regime in South Africa. Indeed, all the struggle is about a separate state and so on. They don't have to worry too much. Their economic relations with Israel are much more important to them. Their political relations to Israel are much more important to them. So they can get by verbally talking about the Palestinian struggle, this, that, etc. here. But it doesn't mean too much to them. That's why, even when they've talked about the two-state solution, the erosion of the two-state solution has only resulted in some verbal, occasional, intermittent condemnation. Nothing has been done to stop the Israeli government from making the two-state solution, abandoning the two-state solution. In fact, what you have in Israel is unlike, I'll come to that here, you have in Israel all the Jewish parties, both in opposition and in power, no longer talk about the two-state solution. They've even officially declared that's an end. You have the American ambassador, Mike Huckabee, now saying that the two-state solution is dead. And that's in a sense what is really happening. And also remember one thing which distinguishes the success of the struggle against apartheid and settler colonialism in South Africa as compared to Israel, and that is that you had a much more unified leadership and organization of the struggle in South Africa. But in Israel and in the Palestinians, you have a force which is leading the PA of Fatah, which has actually become a subcontractor and is dependent on Israel and aid and support financially from the West, which was not the case in South Africa. So even this absence of a unified leadership weakens the Palestinian. In other words, the struggle in South Africa was much stronger. Here it is much weaker. And given the fact that most ruling classes through their governments are not bothered so much about the moral dimension as distinct from their public, why are you surprised that they are so pro-Israel and going along? I mentioned the ideological dimension. That applies, of course, to India, where the difference between the BJP and other political parties is they see an ideological kinship between Hindutva and Zionism. And that, of course, gives them greater degree of emotional and political desire to give political support to Israel. But don't forget, in the Europe and North America, the rise of Islamophobia because of the migrant issue and so on, which also predisposes them to be more sympathetic. But that's not the most important reason. The more important reasons are the economic and political dimensions here. And Israel is important to many of these countries. And apart from this, the realpolitik dimension, which Professor Pasha emphasized, I just want to say one thing about this before shifting to the second part. And that is that even in India, you have many, many strategic experts, realpolitikers in the media and academia and so on, who are anti-Hindutva, but are not opposed that seriously to the relationship with Israel. After all, many of them write articles saying, don't be ridiculous. Don't expect us to be more Arab than the Arab governments, because the Arab governments have not been sufficiently concerned about the Palestinians. And the reason for that, of course, is that they have Arab governments, which are in most cases, since the Second World War, the longest standing continuing dictatorships, in many cases, are more worried about their own public, which is very pro-Palestinian, and would like to contain them here. And as Professor Pasha pointed out, especially with regard to the Gulf monarchies, that you in fact have them relying on the United States as a support structure. So you have all of these regions that indicate why the countries which are democracies or so-called democracies are much more pro-Israel than here, and have really been doing very little. There are exceptions, of course. We have differences between Germany, which has, and other countries which have a guilt complex. There's a difference between what Ireland and Spain are doing and so on. We can discuss that later on. What about the ambitions and aims of Israel and the United States? It's very clear. They're going to create a concentration camp in which they're going to control the whole of the north of Gaza. They're going to have a concentration camp. They're carrying out daily killings. There's starvation. They're going to make life unlivable. The talk about a ceasefire. They're much more concerned about getting more hostages released and, of course, controlling the situation. Even if there is a ceasefire, they will not allow any Palestinian representation in organizing if there is a ceasefire, and there may well not be. And they will continue to try and push more and more Palestinians out by making things unlivable. And the United States is already talking to a number of countries to get them to accept the displacement of Gazans to their countries. Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland. There's even talk of them having talked to Morocco and even to Indonesia to see what they can do. Now, even if there's a displacement of a few thousand, tens of thousands, 100,000 at a time, it sets a precedent. At the moment, Jordan and Egypt are opposed towards that, of displacing, accepting there. But the point is that they're setting a precedent, and they'll keep on doing this. And as far as the West Bank is concerned, they're moving ahead. In fact, the two-state solution is a chimera. Everybody talks about it as if this is the way to do it. But even if you want a two-state solution, you have to shift the relationship forces to make that possible. And one of the greatest problems in thinking that there can be a two-state solution is that no outside power is going to be accepted by Israel, in the sense that a two-state solution today would mean a civil war in Israel itself. So let's be very clear. Okay, it's up to this right of self-determinate Palestinians, and more Palestinians in the occupied territories are understanding this. But even if you want to say that we should have a two-state solution, how do you shift the relationship of forces in that direction to make that a possibility, given so far that there has been a complete erosion of that in so many ways? And even the old Oslo Accords was a two-state, which was not really a two-state. It would have no control over its own airspace, so on, etc. Yeah. What do you do now? Where do you move towards that? Well, remember I said the South African leadership and struggle was much more unified. How do we move towards a greater unification of all the factions and struggles there, which are different perspectives in different ways, but are united in wanting justice and an end to the oppression of the Palestinians here? Here you come again, about the stumbling block. And my own view is that since Israel has said very clearly that the two-state solution is not on, the Palestinian leadership, the Palestinians can say, look, that's for us to decide. But when you are saying that, what about the question of rights and justice? A focus on the struggle for rights and justice, and I would suggest that this has to be basically in a non-violent way. You cannot defeat Israel militarily. And in fact, I'm not saying that you don't have the right to physically defend yourself when they're coming at you and all. Yes, of course. But I'm saying that as an offensive strategy, as a strategy that by carrying out attacks and so on, that you're going to be able to shift the relationship of forces. No, you can't. Because unlike in the case of South Africa, Israel has a lot of support from sections of the public and from other countries in the West and elsewhere by talking about the Holocaust, its right to exist, and all the rest of it, even though this is ridiculous in so many ways. But you can't defeat it militarily. You have to fight it in terms of the struggle there. And many liberals in the United States who are very pro the United States of America maintaining primacy, and of course Israel, are worried that if it actually shifts to a struggle for rights and justice and equality, it will be much more difficult for the governments elsewhere to deny that. In other words, focus on the question of apartheid. And this is also very important because this struggle on apartheid can connect 4 areas of struggle, because you have to have these connection with these 4 areas of struggle. One, there is a struggle by Palestinians within the green line of Israel for greater rights. And what happened in 2021 was very important because for the first time, there was a unity intifada in the sense that the Palestinians in the occupied territories carried out agitations and struggles in support of the Palestinians in the Green Line area, which of course creates a vice versa connection, that the two of them get connected. The second is the struggle within the occupied territories for rights. Even the occupier has to obey certain rights. This with regard to that, all that here. That too is a very, very important struggle. And struggle for, okay, you're talking about this all land belongs to all yours. You're making the question of a two-state solution unviable and impossible. What about our rights? Okay, we're not denying that. What about our rights? What about us here? Because the ambition of the Israeli at the moment, expel as many Palestinians in Gaza out, ethnically cleanse them, to the extent that we can also do this in the West Bank. Let's also try to do so. But we are not going to be able to complete that project. And we may not even be able to complete the project where it is easier in Gaza. But let's at least reduce the population so that it is much more manageable, or control them in a way that is much more manageable. And the struggle for rights, of course, becomes one method by actually pushing against this and also helping to create the possibility of a newer left within Israel, which has greatly declined, but can respond to the idea of greater rights and all for Palestinians, both in the Green Line and there. And the third aspect, of course, of rights is the Palestinian diaspora. The Palestinian diaspora wants the right of return. And what they mean by the right of return is not that they all want to come back. They want equal rights where they are, but they want the Israeli government to establish and Israel to accept the right of return, meaning that they want them to accept that there was a profound injustice in the creation of Israel, even as Israel argues that this was a rectification of an injustice after the Holocaust and the oppression of Jews. And that is very, very important because you cannot have new relations between a colonizing country and the colonizer, or between a white racism and those suffering from apartheid, unless the other side admits that they were wrong and that this was an injustice, to recognize that this is an injustice. And that too becomes important also for another reason. We need more representation from the Palestinian diaspora in the struggle to shape the future of Palestine. And what I mean by here is that given the situation now, we need a new leadership in of Palestinians. We need a new strategic perspective of fighting against apartheid for rights and justice in a basically non-violent manner, which I admit is very easy for me to say because Israel will continue to carry out brutalities and killings, but it cannot be as severe and as extensive as it is now, if in fact what Palestinians are saying, we are not threatening you. We're not threatening the life by arms there. And that, I think, is also very important. And the other point, which is very, very important here, is that if you're fighting for rights and justice and equality, there is a powerful impact on the struggle for rights and equality by the public within the other Arab countries. Do not separate the struggle for justice for Palestine from the struggle there. Because if there is one successful overthrow of a dictatorship within the Arab world, that is going to dramatically shift the relationship of forces and will shake the other governments that are outside in Europe and elsewhere about Israel here. In other words, there's a famous saying that the road to Jerusalem, that is the liberation of the Palestinians, passes through Cairo and Amman. And that's something that, of course, the Arab leaders and all are extremely worried about. Notice that for all their verbal talk about Palestinians and all, there's been no renunciation of the Abraham Accord. There has been no use of the oil weapon, unlike in 1973, when, of course, that took place here. So these all are connected. How do you greatly unify that? And how do you move towards that? Here, what's happened is that in March this year, there was an agreement that there is going to be new elections for the president of the Palestinian Authority and for the Palestinian Legislative Assembly. And that there should also be a reinstatement of the Palestinian National Council. The PLO is the overarching body. The Palestinian National Council is the world parliament, which has over 700 representatives, and it needs more. What I mean is that when you talk about a parliament as in India and the question of democracy, you have all kinds of parties in the Indian parliament. Similarly, in the Palestinian National Council, there can be all kinds of parties, and you can have greater representation for the different organizations in the Palestinian diaspora. As Edward Said said long ago, this is very important to give greater representation in this parliament because this Palestinian diaspora elsewhere, not only in Jordan and Egypt, can play a much, much more important role. In fact, because of the genocide, it is actually succeeding to a certain extent in generating popular support in Western Europe and in North America. Actually, more so than we are able to do here in India. And this exercises certain pressure, which gets reinforced if you're saying that, look, we just want rights and justice. What the hell are you talking about? Apartheid here. So I think this is the direction in which we must move. And it is a responsibility for us, of course, to fight against our own national governments and to generate this kind of support. I think this is the way that we should move. And in the Indian context, as I would say that we also have to work on the other political parties in India. We have 41 political parties represented in the Lok Sabha. And only 10 of them have even spoken about the Palestinian question. Most have kept quiet. They say, what's the reason for that? And the reason for that is that, it will be seen as Muslim appeasement. The other dimension that we also have to make to take up, which distinguishes India as a so-called liberal democracy from other so-called liberal democracy, is that most people in India, because it's a poor country of great inequalities, are concerned with livelihood issues. Foreign policy issues are one which those who are beyond certain livelihood concerns, basic livelihood concerns, will also address. Yes, you bring them in, but you bring them in through your political parties, which has a base and all. In other parts of the world, the middle class sections have certain progressive dimensions that do concern themselves about what's happening on the world scale. We have a problem in the sense that we have a middle class which is growing, but is increasingly reactionary. Therefore, in a certain sense, if we want to move towards greater democratization in India, we have to also connect to the struggle for Palestine, because against the struggle against this reactionary middle class. And insofar as we are successful in the struggle against this action middle class, it also widens the space where there can be much greater solidarity and support for the Palestinian struggle. So this would be my summing up. I hope I've not taken too long. My apologies if we have. All Indians love to talk. My apologies. I can't hear you. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Aditya, you are mute.
I'm sorry. I said thank you, but not all Indians. You said all Indians love to talk, but I said not all Indians talk as wisely as you do. But thank you very much indeed, Achin, for this talk and focusing on the solutions. And I'm glad that Wafa is still here. Especially, I appreciate the fact that you argue that the focus should shift from the two-state solution to a focus on apartheid and on a fight for justice, equality, human rights, etc. And this is an interesting proposition. And also, I must say, I appreciate the fact that you agree with Gandhiji after such a long tradition of you being part of a Marxist tradition for such a long time, that the solution for Palestinian people will have to be found in a non-violent way of doing it, that it is not going to be a military solution. This is what Gandhi had argued in 1938 as well. Now, since Wafa is here, before we open it out to the public, I think a large number of issues have been raised to which you would like to react, and we would be very grateful to use your presence to hear your views on much that has been said.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Actually, Professor Vanaik raised so many ideas that need further discussion. But I'll start with the last one, which is to fight for rights, justice in a non-violent way. I think this is a way to escape the reality and the powerlessness of the world order to hold Israel accountable. So instead of holding it accountable for the genocide and the atrocities and the attacks on Palestinians and for attacking the right of Palestinians to self-determination, comes whoever, not only you, whoever, and decides this is what Palestinians want. This is not what we want. When you ask the Palestinians, we want to have our free Palestine, independent Palestine. If the world cannot serve this purpose, then you don't change it. You don't turn us as third-class citizens in a country that we're entitled to have as Palestinians who have been here for hundreds of years. And then we will shift, instead of fighting for freedom, then we will shift to become the South African apartheid and start the struggle all over again. This is a failure of the world system. I'm sorry, it's not acceptable that we turn into that. You don't see the settlers. This is a country of settlers. It's not only the army, it's a government, a fascist government, and a fascist society, which takes me to another point. I'm sorry, sir. There is no left in Israel. The left, the so-called left in Israel, was for the genocide in Palestine, was for the genocide in Gaza. They only wanted to get their prisoners back, but then to continue with the genocide. There wasn't this voice raised against Netanyahu and his government. The recent demonstrations that we saw, they're very few, they're very little, they're minority of the minority that I cannot count on. So this is the second thing. The two states. I'm a civil society activist. I meet with so many diplomatic missions to Palestine. And for the past 15 years, I've been telling everybody, you don't need me to speak. Just take a tour around Ramallah. Ramallah, which is almost the capital, the political capital of the Palestinian Authority. And you will see there is no hope. There is no way of the two states solution, because what happened since Oslo, the Israelis expanded the settlements. Palestinians live on almost 1/3 of the West Bank, and the rest is occupied. And of course, this information, I'm not educating a professor who clearly knows the specifics of the Palestinian issue today, not only the history. So with all respect, I hope you don't take it personally, but this is like I'm talking because I live it. I live it every day. I'll tell you. For instance, I've been living in the West Bank. I was banned from reaching and meeting my family for 11 years. And the West Bank and Gaza, it's 1.5 hours drive from Ramallah to Gaza. I couldn't meet my family for 11 years. And then when I was allowed to do that, I had to travel to Jordan, from Jordan to Cairo, from Cairo to Gaza, in order to meet my parents and my family. This is the kind of apartheid. My husband, who is Palestinian, who was born in Jordan, and he doesn't have a Palestinian ID, but he's Palestinian. He's actually from Wafa. When we got married, he had a permit for 1 month, and he stayed. It took him 10 years to be recognized by Israel as a legal person. Why I'm saying that? Because I'm saying since day one, the Palestinian Authority was born not to be concluded in a project of a state. It was only created to serve the security of Israel. And when we talk security of Israel and why the Western so-called democracy supports Israel, it's very simple. It's a colonial project. When we thought colonialism was over, when Biden was visiting Israel after 7th of October, he put it bluntly and clearly. If Israel wasn't there, we would have established an Israel. So for them, they wouldn't care about the Palestinians. They wouldn't care about creating a state. It's only to manage the conflict. It's only to silence the indigenous people of Palestine. And you put it correctly and truly, and I completely agree with you. Now, when we're talking about democracies, we don't really talk about ethics. So let's not be delusional that those democracies are ethical, or they carry values, or they care about human beings. No, 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 no. This is a capitalist project. And the checks and balances, I saw the discussion in the chat. I liked it very much. Thank you very much for the support in the chat. But the checks and balances, the checking on the poor, the balances, it's to hold the poor accountable. It's a failing system, whether we like it or not. And even elections, when it comes to Palestinians, elections was the recipe to divide Palestinians. The Palestinian division, why we're divided? It's not because we want to be divided. Israel has invested so much in order to divide the Palestinians. The Arabs did so. The international community did so. When we were deprived from the right to resist, we don't have this right. And even if it's recognized in the different charts of the UN, in practice, where terrorists. It's so simple. I was talking about the media and what kind of narrative is the media is carrying and is actually brainwashing the people. We are the victims. We are the terrorists. We don't have the right to shout and say, look at the criminals and what they do to us. I remember at the beginning of the genocide, the first week I reported what is happening in Gaza, we said this would be under Gaza Speaks Up. The second week, because I have my family there, my friends, my colleagues, and the images that I was seeing, the systematic criminal acts of the Israeli state and army and people, I decided to change it into genocide. That was before any international organization or any international law would come up and talk about the genocide. I felt it was a genocide. And today I'm like, let's see how weak you are. No, we're not weak. I don't think we're weak. I don't think, but I'll finish with that. I don't think we're weak for a very simple reason. Palestine issue is not a Palestinian cause anymore. And it wasn't to start with the Balfour Declaration, with the establishment of the State of Israel, the partition plan, etc. It was an international issue. It was an international international community imposing different solutions for Palestine. And today, they cannot just withdraw and say, you, the Palestinians, with the Israelis. When it comes to nonviolent, I've been part of this nonviolent for so many years. It didn't protect us. It didn't provide the Palestinian state. It didn't fulfill the right to self-determination that we Palestinians were looking for. You asked me about the two states. I don't believe in the two states. Not today, but long time back. It's a failure. But when it's a failure, it doesn't mean then I will go to the position of like fighting for rights and equality. My final word to that, and yes, I would love, of course, to understand where I come from, and this is why I'm like passionate and like talking. We, like the Indians, we use our body language as well. When I saw also in the chat the statement, it's good to do statements, and many people are asking, what shall we do? I think one thing that should be done today is to work more with the youth, because the digital Indian army that is employed against the Palestinians, they're young people. Palestinians don't hear Professor Pasha. They don't see you. They don't hear you. They don't hear majority of the people in this room. But we see the young Indians, young Hindus, and I saw so many young Muslim Indians who were attacking Palestinians. We need to talk more to the youth. We need to educate our youth, because if I'm saying we're very hopeful, I'm hopeful in the movements all around Europe, the US, the students, the youth, the grassroots, and I'm hopeful in the new generation in India. And I'll continue to be hopeful. I'll continue to think. This is my last point. If it was between, I'm still, I'll listen to you, of course, I'm still here. If it was to Palestinians against Israelis alone, we wouldn't be defeated. The whole world was with Israel against the 2.3 Palestinians in Gaza, including the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I don't see that much difference between what you're saying and myself. I'm saying, let me make it very clear. The right to self-determination is to be decided by the Palestinians, not by me. Not you have to decide it over here. We can agree or disagree here, but my point is that what is the goal? You yourself have said that the two-state solution not on. It's up to the Palestinians to decide what is the goal. My suggestion, however, whatever my point of view, is that fighting for rights and justice is a way to actually shift the relationship of forces so that the Palestinian struggle advances. And by shifting the relationship of force in the region, it makes more possible whatever the goal that the Palestinians want. The idea of fighting for rights and justice is intimately connected to the question of connecting the struggle between Palestinians, both in the Green Line and here, and also connecting the struggle of Palestinians with the non-Palestinian Arab population and even the Iranian population, which is suffering under dictatorship. So that creates a greater strength which can shift the relationship. So that's my particular point. I leave
But
it at
not
that.
shaking the system, because this is another way of doing it. It's to shake the Israeli apartheid and criminal system. It's to hold them accountable. I think this is the other way to.
Which is the other way? Because my understanding is that fighting for rights and justice, highlighting the fact that they are so discriminatory, anti-Rista, is precisely the way to also generate support among the public and other parts of the world to change it. My second point, briefly, is I don't want to be misunderstood here. Palestinians have a moral right to fight with violence against Israel.
Sure.
But
no, this is we understood, clearly.
Yeah, but it does not have a moral right to kill civilians. Soldiers, something different. Yes, right? However, in different parts of the world, different circumstances, an offensive military strategy can be successful or it can be unsuccessful. For example, in the case of the United States intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, the killing of American soldiers was a very, very important part of the process by which the Americans also decided and the American public decided that they want to pull out. In my view, and I may be wrong, this is not the way that one will succeed in creating success with regard to the question of Israel. And lastly, the point about the Arab left, you are absolutely right. The left doesn't exist. In fact, the younger generation in Israel is worse in many ways than an earlier generation which was here. But this is in contrast to the Jewish population elsewhere, which is becoming more and more critical. And that Jewish population elsewhere is, of course, here. So my point is that I'm, maybe because of the way I phrased it or whatever here, but I don't quite understand here, especially because I was taken aback by your saying the two-state solution from the beginning was also, not from the beginning, because they were never serious about it.
Yes.
They were never serious about it. So I'm not very, very clear about what the differences are. But yes, and we have a supportive role. It's the Palestinians to decide your goal, and here, but Palestinians are also divided among themselves in terms of what's the goal, this, that, etc., whatever here. But
despite agreeing or not agreeing, but I honestly liked the way you presented this whole thing, and I'm very thankful. And of course, we can talk more. I don't think we disagree on the Palestinian rights, on the need to have people around the world to support Palestinians. And this is why I say I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that the world is changing, and I hope India is changing as well. We need you, and we will continue to need you, because you're not UK, I was reading, and you're not Germany. And as I said before, we have a lot in common that brings us together. Serving our cause will serve your cause as well.
I think hearing both of you, we can see how actually there is a lot of agreement. Clearly, Achin is not saying that the Israeli people do not have a right to self-determination. Sorry, the Palestinian people do not have a right to self-determination. He's saying, of course they have. But in order to achieve that, given that even what you said just now, that Israel is an international issue, the world must be held accountable. I, as I understand, Achin, to move in that direction, focusing on rights may be a good step forward. This step forward is not to abandon the goal of self-determination. Am I right, Achin, in understanding? Step
Absolutely,
in that
absolutely.
direction. So I think both of you, we are on the same page as the two of you are concerned. Professor Pasha, would you like to come in before I open it to the floor?
Please unmute.
Yes, I entirely endorse what Wafa and Professor Vinayak have been highlighting regarding the struggle. But you see, the issue which was confined to the four walls of the United Nations and Human Rights Council and such other close diplomatic, quartet and diplomatic enclaves now has become a global issue in the sense like never before. Palestine and what is being done to the Palestinians by the Jews, by the Israelis, is known to all corners of the world. Whether it is through the live streaming, the genocide, or through newspapers, social media, etc., etc. I have traveled quite a lot around the world and never have seen the awareness of the people. Even in the United States, much of the people there who were pro-Israeli now are aghast at what Israel is doing and what they have come to know, not just in Gaza and West Bank, but also the stranglehold of the Jews within Israel. Their taxpayers' money, billions of dollars is being sent in the name of the American people by the government without letting them know. I mean, these kind of outrageous things are now being discussed in the primaries when elections are taking place for the post of mayor or governor or House of Representatives, senators. Now, the Palestinian issue is a live issue in every place, every meeting, in every gathering, in universities. Not just the Arab students or Palestinian students, but people who have nothing to do, who just came for studies. Now they are aware of what is happening, how their universities are investing in Israeli war industries, Israeli economy, and how Wall Street is controlled, manipulated, forward trading, or the deep state, the stranglehold of the CIA, and the collaboration between Mossad and CIA, not just between the two countries, but around the world. How Israel is portraying itself. Like, for example, in the 90s, since 90s, Israel has been impressing upon the Indian government that if you want to have good relations with America, we will facilitate. We will use our influence with the American administration to put pressure on Pakistan on the cross-border terrorism, so on and so forth. So like that, they have been doing for Arab countries also to facilitate their legitimacy. And the world is now knowing the other side of the coin. Now that matter has gone to the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, this is no more an issue between the state of Israel and the Palestinians. But it is. I'm glad that the kind of references Wafa made about the BJP's IT cell manipulating the Indian side. It is just a short story. Bulk of the Indians now know what is happening, unfolding in Gaza, in West Bank, and the kind of atrocities which are happening there, and how this government is enabling the Israeli government, not just by sending human resources, but also, you see, now Israeli technology is used to produce weapons, and on behalf of Israel, India is exporting to many of the third world countries, surveillance equipment, so on and so forth, which Israel cannot directly export. So now we are enabling and facilitating the Israeli war machine in its export business, and this creation of wars, civil wars, intra-tribal wars, so on and so forth, is leading to the killing of millions and millions in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and in Europe, so on and so forth. So lastly, you see the kind of optimism which grew from Ukraine. They thought that by supporting Ukraine and imposing sanctions on Russia, they will weaken, and like the Soviet Union, which was expelled from Afghanistan, they will also divide and disintegrate Russia. That has not happened. And the same kind of approach was tried through Gaza, through Israel, to maintain Israeli supremacy. But Iran thwarted it and inflicted huge damage. Now the Americans and the West are realizing that they have exceeded their limit, and there is a limit to what the Western hegemony empire can do. And this awakening of the Palestinian cause and the reordering of the international order from Gaza is just the beginning, and how BRICS will shape and how the West is undermining its own multilateral institutions, whether it is United Nations or IMF, World Bank, manipulating it to favor and punish others. It is all unfolding, and no power can stop China or the emergence of BRICS in a major way. Americans are trying to use India to undermine BRICS from within, or the UAE, but I don't see, and the Palestinians are paying a very heavy price, not only in terms of their freedom, but also they are now propelling the world towards justice, and until they are given justice, the world order is going to take shape because of them, because of the heroic contribution. So in that way, people all over the world who support Palestine, they are contributing to a much more fairer world, and the new forces, I think, will ultimately triumph.
Thank you. While it is clear, and we take a lot of hope from what Wafa says about the Palestinian people's determination to fight, to continue to fight, we must also recognize that what is happening is perhaps unprecedented. It is not even Vietnam, it is much worse. And in a global situation, as Achin and Professor Pasha has been pointing out, this isolation of the event, of the whole world allowing it to happen, and what is actually happening to the Palestinian people, about which many people have now written, that how far you can push a people. So let us not be, we cannot be sanguine that the capacity of the people will always triumph. Of course, we have hope, we all support, but we must also recognize that things must be done now, so that the spirit is not wiped out, so that the spirit that is there can be built upon to fight back. And that is what I think the panelists today were introspecting on. Professor Vanaik suggested one way out, shifting the focus to human rights, which may appeal to the world a little more than something else, not to engage in a military conflict, because then the excuse will be there that they are equal on both sides. And Professor Pasha gives us hope that a new world order will be possible, that BRICS and the others, that Western hegemony perhaps will not last. And let us hope so. If something needs to happen, I think that is what the consensus is, that we've reached an intolerable situation, and we must all introspect and see where and how one is to intervene. I would like to now open the floor to people who may want to ask questions, you please raise your hand, or if your question is in the chat box, then Shabnam will kindly help and read out the question.
There is a hand up, Ranjan Solomon, and there are quite a few comments and questions in the chat box also.
Right. So shall we start with Ranjan? Please.
Yeah.
Ranjan, unmute
Okay.
yourself, please.
Yes, I have unmuted myself. There's just one short comment and a question. I don't think it's possible to refute this idea of an armed struggle. That's legitimate. It's even in the UN Covenant of Human Rights. I'm not saying that they're going to win, but if you talk to Palestinians, they're saying we're not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere. They go by the principle of sumud, what they call sumud or resilience, and they have it. So they say, we are not going anywhere. We'll fight and we'll stay. This is our land. They are very determined about it. The second thing is, I don't know if we should think that Israel is winning this war, because even historians, these are Jewish historians and journalists and thinkers who are saying that the Zionist project is coming to an end. Not 100 years from now, but it's coming. So if people like Ilan Pappé and Gideon Levy and others who are writing about this, it doesn't mean nothing. The Zionist project cannot survive because it survived on cruelty. How can you live on cruelty alone? That's my question.
Any other questions? Maybe the panelists can take them all together.
Should I read the questions from the chat box?
Will you kindly do so,
There
Shabnam?
is one from Rakesh Agarwal saying, please explain why right-wing forces are on the rise everywhere. Terrorist Israel, anyway, that's just, then I'm just going, there are comments. No, that was just one. All others are so far comments. If there is a question, I can tell you after someone has answered these two.
Sure. Please. I see another hand. Habiba. Habiba, would you like to ask your question, please?
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Habiba Hanif Mohammed. I'm a sociology honors student from Jamia Millia Islamia. So, as Professor Pasha as well also mentioned that how India is also complicit by being a facilitator in the ongoing genocide, because currently India is the largest buyer of Israeli weapons, and it has spent $2.1 billion in the last decade. And so India is complicit by facilitating this genocide in Gaza, and by contributing to the Israeli economy. India is also facilitating this genocide in Gaza. And we also see the Indian government's crackdown across India on any pro-Palestinian voices, on any pro-Palestinian solidarity. So how do we, what is also to be noted is that India has been a pro-Palestinian before the 1990s. And India was also one of the first states to recognize the state of Palestine. However, how do we see this current status, this current situation, this current position that India has right now? And in the name of diplomacy, is it diplomacy or is it hypocrisy, that while on one hand you would call yourself Bush guru, you would call yourself a leader of the world who's been speaking for the global south. However, when it comes to speaking for the rights of the Palestinian people, where is the stand? Where do we see the Indian government? How do we see them speaking for the people of Gaza? So yeah, sure, all right, thank you so much.
Maybe,
Can I answer the chairperson?
please, good idea.
Yes, a very interesting question. You see, this NDA government, the BJP RSS-led government has convinced, which is Hindutva and which is based on majoritarian rule as it convinces, and repeatedly they have mentioned that they don't need minority votes. They do everything possible to monopolize the majority vote, that is the Hindu vote, as they say. And they have convinced themselves that they have in common the right-wing forces which have emerged in the state of Israel under Likud and Benjamin Netanyahu and the other smaller parties like Ben Gavir and Smotrich, etc. You see, after the collapse of the labor movement, Mapai and Mapam in Israel, since 1977, when the Labour Party was defeated by Likud, the majority of the supporters of the Likud have been the Oriental Jews, those Jews who were brought from the Afro-Asian countries, mostly from Yemen and Baghdad, Iraq and Syria and Egypt and so on and so forth. So these Oriental Jews, which are known as brown Jews, they don't have much contacts like the white Jews who came from Europe and other countries, who have double passports, and in any crisis they go back to Europe, Canada, Australia, and America. So these have become the backers of the Likud bloc, and the rise of extremism, you can trace it under Menachem Begin, Itamar Isaac Hamir, Ariel Sharon, and this Benjamin Netanyahu. So these have pandered to the Oriental Jews, and now they are supported by the Manhattan Jews, the American Jews who have dual citizenship or dual passport, and they keep shuttling from New York to Tel Aviv, and they have all the facilities in terms of schools, education, and so on and so forth. So they lobby in the United States, mobilize funds, they come and stay for a few weeks in the settlements in the West Bank, and they terrorize the Palestinian people. So the right-wing forces, as both the speakers admitted, left-wing forces in Israel have become weak. And many of the key positions are now held by the right-wing forces in administration, in the army, and so on and so forth. And no wonder in the Knesset also you have this kind of skewed system. So the right-wing forces and the Indian Hindutva forces see hand in hand. And this is in league with the right-wing forces in the United States also under President Trump. So there is a triangular relationship which has grown. And what is interesting is the right-wing forces here have convinced themselves that they are going to win in the global struggle for power. That if we identify with Israel and with America, they believe that through Ukraine, Russia will be humbled, will be disintegrated. And once China and Russia friendship is broken, then they will concentrate on China, and they will defeat either militarily or from within. So that is how the utopian scenario is building up, and they have convinced, and no wonder our government feels obliged to the United States, to Israel, and this triangular relationship, like in the Ukraine, is living in its own fantasy. And we have seen how Iran has demolished single-handedly the Israeli propaganda that they can be the invincible power. So in that way, this as long as these forces remain here, which are being weakened, you saw in the last parliamentary election, the BJP did not get a majority. they are on the crumbs of TDP and Nitish Kumar. And, this is uncertain. And in Israel also, Benjamin Netanyahu is just waiting and prolonging the war just to be in power. He has so many cases, corruption cases and criminal cases against him. And his own ministers are trying to undermine him if he doesn't continue the war and this genocide in Gaza. So in that way, both these governments are weakened, and it's a matter of time before Trump, his Make America Great collapses under his own Trump and trade and tariff war, because nobody is willing to sign a trade agreement, not even their ally Canada or European Union, nor Japan, nor Mexico. And we have been bending backward from the beginning, but now we see national interests being mentioned by Piyush Goyal, our Commerce Secretary. So in that way, you see the American economic structure has become so weak and indebted that they won't be able to sustain their unsustainable $1 trillion plus billion, $1 trillion defense budget, and the kind of deficit financing, and the dollar is being slowly weakened. Now, bulk of the trade between Russia and China is without dollars. Between Iran sells 90% of its 3.5 million barrels of oil to China without the dollar is being used. Iran also trades billions of dollars with Russia without dollar. So more and more countries are now realizing that the artificial value of the dollar is ruining their economy, and they will slowly bypass it. The process has started. So in that way, the misnomer of win against Russia and China, our right-wing government continues to believe, and no wonder the Trump administration is using this leverage against the Modi government, and also the neighborhood, how Sheikh Hasina's government was overthrown. There is fear that if they don't listen, you see, we did everything possible over the last 35 years to win American friendship. Now, President Trump says that Pakistan is a great nation. He's praising our enemy and trying to take credit for the ceasefire they have imposed on us, and which we continuously deny, utterly failing in our diplomatic approach. So in that way, the forces which now hold sway in India, Israel, and America appear to be strong, but there are very powerful forces which are undermining them, and I think the forces opposed to them will eventually triumph. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perhaps
Achin,
can
yes?
I? Yeah,
Please.
there are three questions that are here. One, of course, is on Indian complicity. The second on the right-wing shift globally. And the third was on the crisis of Zionism and the armed struggle issue. Let me just take first the right-wing expansion globally. Insofar as this has been a global trend, your first principle of explanation has to be itself global. What is that principle of explanation? That principle of explanation is the shift in capitalist development towards a much more right-wing, miserly form of capitalist development, which has been considered neoliberalism, and the transnational mobility of capital and so on. So this being the general principle, but this being a right-wing shift in economic processes and development can only be stabilized in a world of multiple nation states by right-wing shifts in politics and ideologies, which will be specific to different nation states. So the way Italy moves in the direction of the way US moves, or the way UK moves, and the way India moves is different. The right-wing shift took place in economics not under Modi, but under the Congress. But the Congress is a declining force, and the stabilization of it has now been taken this particular form. So I mean, that would be my response to the question of the right-wing shift. Globally, you have to look at it, you have to connect it to the whole question of here. And everywhere the right-wing shift is involved, what's called the politics of cultural exclusivism. In order for them to stabilize themselves, they have to make somebody or somebody, both internal or external or both, scapegoated. as an enemy, because you will notice that all these right-wing shifts take the form of authoritarian nationalisms. All authoritarian. They are authoritarian populism from above, they are authoritarian populism from below. But all of them are authoritarian nationalisms. There comes the question of power of nationalism and the need to fight at that level. With regard to the question of Indian complicity, um, again, it was in the 1990s that you had a shift towards the recognition and full diplomatic relations. India recognized earlier, but full diplomatic relations with Israel. Please note that this was endorsed and supported by Arafat. It wasn't that Arafat said no. It was precisely because Arafat moved towards the Oslo Accords. Why did Arafat move towards the Oslo Accords? The original perspective of Arafat's leadership of the PLO is that we want a secular, democratic Palestine in which Jews can also be there, an anti-Zionist perspective. Armed struggle during the late 60s and 70s, he pursued an armed struggle strategic approach. It is because by the late 1970s and early 1980s, after the Israel attacked Israel, he moved away from that. One of the reasons for that, of course, is also related to the 1987 Intifada, which was peaceful, throwing up a new leadership and all that here, but he moved away from that. When he moved away from that struggle, you had it, it shows you the limitation of that. Armed struggle was then taken up by the Hamas after the 2000 Intifada anyway. But then will you please notice that within Hamas, there was a conflict between the so-called moderates and the more militant wings here. And it is when the moderates established their domination in many cases over here that they actually moved towards participation in Palestinian elections. And you had, in fact, Ismail Haniyeh sending a letter to Bush that we are prepared for a hudna. And what they meant by a hudna, of course, is that we will, of course, on the lines of a two-state solution, without saying that it's a two-state solution, but that this is the lines that are there, and not making the mistake that Arafat made, that we will recognize Israel. But it was a shift. You then had a period in which the moderates within Hamas kept struggling, and it climaxed in the 2018 Great March of Return, a non-violent movement towards trying to show the solidarity, which was brutally repressed. And it is after that that you also had the movement within Hamas towards a more violent, extreme position there. Now, the question then that is raised by October 7th is very simple. With regard to the question of October 7th, was it strategically, politically an advance or a retreat? Yes, Israel got the excuse it wanted. Israel was repressing, mowing the lawn, all the rest of it. So we understand why that took place. Now you can argue that politically, strategically, there was one significant development. And that significant development was that for 20 years before that, nobody was bothered about the Palestinian question. But what this suddenly did was it brought the Palestinian question to the forefront of global politics and raised the issue that, look, how are you going to resolve peace and security in the Middle East, West Asia, and all the rest, unless you address it? So it revived the Palestinians dramatically. How do you weigh this against what Israel has done in terms of doing that? And what is your overall assessment with regard to whether this has proved a political strategic advance in the struggle for Palestinian justice, or that overall it has actually pushed them back, despite the fact here? Different people will have their different assessments. My position, in fact, is that the political strategic dimension is that it has retreated the struggle in many ways here. It has made it more difficult, and it has created tremendous. Of course, the Israelis don't blame Hamas, it's the Israelis who have done it here. But that is also related internally. The crisis of Zionism. My view here is that as an ideology which is supposed to sustain a state, yes.
It has been seriously weakened. Hmm? But there is a separation between the legitimization of a state power, hmm, and the persistence of that state power. The United States legitimization in terms of democracy and all has been clearly eroded, but that doesn't mean that it is not there. The Chinese and the Russians do not have democratic legitimacy, but it is there. Whether it will succeed or not here. The question in Israel is that yes, you have now, insofar as they want more migration, this is stalled. Do they have economic problems? Yes. All of these things are there, but the future is open ended. The question of drawing some or outlining a particular trend that now Zionism is going to weak at the ideological level, fine, but Israel's Zionist state is going to get weaker and weaker, and this thing is an open-ended question. And the central issue which is going to decide that is the quality of struggle by those who are the victims of it, the quality of struggle by the Palestinians and by support here. This is an open-ended question. And it raises a crucial question: what are the strategic perspectives? What is our goals that we should be fighting at? How do we fight it? And all I'm saying is that because it is an open-ended question, even as we believe that it should be connected to the struggle to overthrow regimes in dictatorial regimes and the neighboring question, this raises the question: is how strong is the crisis of dictatorship and anti-democracy in the world generally and in that area? And again, it's connected to the question of struggle. It's an open-ended question. We should not give up hope. Hmm? We can say yes, yeah, but we should make a sensible assessment of the balance of the weaknesses of the opposition, of our enemies, and the strengths of our enemies, and how we focus there. And I feel that if we can unite the Palestinian struggle, if we can connect the Palestinian struggle to the struggle of others in the Arab world, if we can strengthen the solidarity movements and support boycott, divestment, etc., it creates an advance. But this is a struggle that has been going on longer than any other national liberation struggle in history. And this is something, of course, that is going to be a generation struggle. And I can just end by giving a remarkable tribute to the Palestinian people. And that is that it is amazing that whether you are Palestinians inside the occupied territories or whether you're Palestinian outside, from generation to generation to generation, they are committed to the struggle. This is unlike struggles elsewhere in many ways over here. And this is a remarkable tribute to the Palestinian people. And as long as that generational commitment to the struggle takes place, it's going to make sure that this Israel and Palestine in solidarity cannot hope to last forever. But we have so many other problems, so many other issues, environmental crisis, this, that, etc. But if we give tribute, I mean, if we still hope and we can work for justice for the Palestinian, the greatest credit must go to the remarkable courage of the Palestinian people. In my view, this remarkable people have not had, for any prolonged period of time, the kind of leadership that they deserve, which is why I stressed in my position the question of a new kind of a leadership for the Palestinian people as being absolutely crucial.
Aditya, there is a question in chat box for Wafa.
This is Habida.
No, before that.
So would you please read it out? Because I can't-
Anvesh. It says, how strong is PFLP's influence on Palestinian politics with respect to Hamas? I have limited knowledge of their participation in the Izzeddin al-Qassam brigades, which means they're also allied.
Yes. Okay, with the PFLP, it's the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine, for those who don't know. And
Popular.
it's a leftist party, but in Gaza, they are like Hamas and other parties that believe in the armed struggle. They have formed this leadership command in Gaza, so PFLP is part of this command. But of course, we know the majority are Hamas, Al-Qassam brigades. Hamas is taking the lead. You have Islamic Jihad, you have PFLP, you have a group that is a military group that is affiliated with Fatah, the ruling party that is part of this collective. But actually, I saw a question that I would like to address, which is that was a question about the Palestinian agency in genocide, and I would like to address it very quickly. I can't see it in the chat anymore, but I'm
Yes,
sure
it
the
was there.
person.
It was there.
Yes, the person who
Manav,
raised
yeah,
it.
yeah, right.
And because it's very important to understand that the Israelis and the Israeli apartheid systematically destroyed the Palestinian agency, both physically and politically. Physically, you have to understand there is no safe place. You have to understand that 85 of the Palestinians in Gaza are displaced. Take the journalists, for example, 98% of them, they had to evacuate their places at least one time. And we have something like 40% of them, they had to evacuate more than 10 times. Of course, when we talk about evacuation, they lose everything. The second point has to do with the starvation as a weapon, and we talked about it. And this is the physical survival and displacement in terms of agency. In terms of the political and collective agency, it has been also under attack since day one. First, the targeting of leadership in Gaza, the media blackout, but also I'll add to it the co-optation of the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah and in the West Bank. And third, the resistance as the last form of agency. And here it's very important to talk about resistance, or some people would like to call it resilience, in its like a broader term. So it's not only to carry the weapons and fight back, but it's also documenting the war crimes, protesting. The Gazans are protesting from time to time, rejecting the expulsion to Egypt and other countries. I would conclude when it comes to agency, there is also the international complicity raising and, of course, destroying the Palestinian agency with their complicity, with the little they force on Israel. Like you don't even imagine that they will choose Chapter 7 to be applied to Israel when it was applied to Iraq, it was applied to other places. So when it comes to agency, my final point in that, Palestinians are not passive victims. They resist, they document, and they survive, and they stay. And I think the biggest threat to Israel and its Zionist project is for Palestinians to stay. And I just heard the professor talking about generations, and it's true. I'm a daughter for two parents who were forcefully evicted from their villages in 1948, and we never forgot those villages. And the thing is, our parents, grandparents, they make sure that we understand and we take a position. This is something that we also do with our children. This is the first thing that we teach them. They don't have to carry guns, but they have to carry the narrative. and they have to understand their roots and their history and the need for them to resist in every mean possible. Military resistance is not a goal by itself, it's a means. So we sing, we dance, we write poets, we document, we make films. There is somebody who posted a YouTube link for a documentary that is worth watching about the Great March of Return. And we continue to stand and breathe. And I think this is the biggest resistance ever, because we refuse to leave. This is our country, this is our land, and we're staying. And this is the agency that we are reclaiming despite the genocide and despite all the attacks on our identity. Thank you.
Thank you. Khurshid Ahmed, would you like to ask your question, please?
There are two hands, Khurshid and Habiba.
And Divyani, she's just left or what?
There is, I think, questions in the chat box, new question in the chat box also.
So, Khurshid?
Yes,
Ahmed, please
yes,
try to-
yes.
Yes.
I'm asking the question. From India, how we can help the Palestinian people? Kindly suggest. Secondly, what I think, this ongoing war is a religious war that is fought by the Zionist forces against the Palestinians. So in such a case, how could these countries, Muslim countries, 57 Muslim countries, can be mobilized to help the Palestinian people? These two questions I'm asking. Thank you.
Would you like to answer them, Achin?
Well, the first question about this being a religious war, one should be a bit careful in the sense that Hindutva is foundationally anti-Muslim war against that. But when we talk about Zionism, it's foundationally anti-Palestinian, but happy on the current Islamo. And it's in that sense that you could talk about that. Otherwise, that's what I would say about the religious dimension, about what we can do, right? Recognizing the complicity, we have to try to build support against India's complicity and against India's position in various ways. And here, of course, we carry out all kinds of protest marches, this, that, the boycott, divestment, sanctions approach is there. I would suggest that, of course, there should be a kind of coordination whereby we focus on 2 or 3 key corporate sectors, for example, Adani or something like that, to actually get our message across. And I've also said that we have to generate support through other political parties also, because the role that most other political parties, apart from the left, is very, very, very shabby, very, very shocking. And that's something we have to adhere. And don't separate the struggle, support for Palestine from the struggle against Hindutva here and against Hindutva. So there it is a long-term struggle. Another thing that we can do is that all various solidarity groups can try to connect with each other in India and also connect with the groups outside. And Wafa has also suggested that there's much that one can do on the social media. Our job is to try to generate awareness among this public in India. This is a long-term struggle. And the difference between the social media use in many other countries, like in the US, you might be surprised to know and hear, is that the left is much, and liberals are much more dominant within the social media in the United States. Here it is the right and far right that is more dominant. And can we creatively, in various ways, change that in various ways on social media? So it has its strengths, it has its limitations, but these are all the things that we can do with regard to our political parties, with regard to greater coordination, and unification with regard to carrying out. I've suggested to the left parties here who can organize this, let's have a day of action in which all over the country you have different groups and all doing their own thing, but they're doing it in a day of action, which itself indicates. And for that to happen, we should be able to connect on the media, prepare for something like that, and get the message across there. So these are all things that we can do and we have to keep on trying to do.
Can I add to this, please? Can I?
Please.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Wafa, can you also then take, there are 3 questions for you in the chat box.
Yes, I saw a question
okay,
here. Very quickly, concerning the Islamic countries, we gave up on them long time back. But this is like a side note, okay? But the main point is what has been made by the professor. This is not a religious conflict. And please don't take it this way. The Israeli narrative, the Israeli propaganda wishes to turn it into a religious conflict. No, it's a conflict about justice. And this takes me to the question of what shall we do? I think the first step is to understand that the Palestine question is a justice compass for all those fighting for freedoms and justices all over the world. It's not isolated. It's not for Palestinians. It's for the Indians. It's for the South Africans. It's for the Iranians. This is the compass that actually checks your conscience and where you stand when it comes to your humanity. So it's not about religion. We don't wish to turn it into a religious question. If this is part of your conviction, we wouldn't say no. I mean, you're welcome, but we don't wish to see it as like religions fighting each other. This is one part.
This is a very important point you've made, that all the panelists have repeated, that this is imperialism, this is capitalism.
Exactly.
You know, this is a domination of a different kind. They would like to call it a religious war. Just
Exactly.
to say that Hindutva is a quarrel over religion is to miss the point, that this is a fascist force emerging out of a completely right-wing agenda. So it is a trap which we should not fall. It is not a religious war. The Jews, as was mentioned by a speaker, have lived in the Arab world for centuries peacefully.
And so they were protected and they lived equally, etc. But I'll add a point to this and then go to the other questions. I was born in Gaza. Of course, I kept, whenever I was allowed to visit, to go and be there. It's very important for me to mention that I have my own differences with Hamas. I'm never on the same side when it comes to their ideological convictions. I'm a feminist. I fight for a secular state where religions are respected and religious people. This is a choice you make. I have a sister who's wearing full hijab. So this is our freedom of choice. So I had my differences. I had my fights with Hamas for so many years. But when it comes to where do I stand on the national issue, of course, I'm on the same side of Hamas against the Israeli Zionist project and the genocide. So it's very important for the people outside to understand the dynamics, the internal dynamics. They're our business. It's nobody's business. So if this whole thing will stop, like the genocide will stop, and if we will have whatever government is going to rule later on, I'll continue the fight, not only with Hamas, but also with the patriarchal system in Ramallah. So it's to understand those dynamics vis-a-vis when it comes to our national struggle to end the occupation and to stop the genocide. I saw a question concerning about the different numbers that you hear different numbers of casualties. Actually, Ministry of Health in Gaza only documents those who have been killed and arrived to their hospitals and facilities. So when we're talking about around 60,000, there are almost 59,000 people killed so far. Actually, those are the people that were recognized and they went through the hospitals and they were buried. But those who are under the rubble, we think that they are double the number. We have huge amounts of rubble. For instance, my cousin's family, he lost, it was him, his sons, the grandchildren. We're talking about 23 people of one family that were killed by a bombardment from Israel. But what was retrieved, only 5 of them. So to this end, we know 23 were killed, but they revived 5 bodies. So the 5 bodies were counted, but the rest of them were not counted. So this is to answer this question. And there was another question. Yes, again, the question which I see very important, and we need to get out of our boxes trying to respond to that. What can we do? I think talking, and I insist on that, talking about Gaza, talking about the people of Gaza to your circles, because what I see, I can see one person who is pro-Israel in the chat, but the rest, they're sending messages of support and messages of love and solidarity. I'm not talking to you because you don't need to be convinced. Maybe you needed to listen to a different insight being a Palestinian living here that comes through me, but you didn't really need convincing. But you're surrounded with people who don't know, who are standing on the wrong side of history. You need to talk to them. You're capable of doing that better than me because you understand the language, you understand what affects them, you understand how you can actually address each circle's mentality, background, and what they stand for. You need to do that, even when it comes to your family circles, the small circles. This is very important. As I said before, the social media and youth. And maybe you can take it further to going to universities and talking to students. I see students in the US. I see Indian students. I studied with Indian students. In Holland, I had friends who are Muslims, Hindu, Christians from India. They were all my friends. Maybe one of the main things that brought them together, they were all, without exception, pro-Palestine. So I think the universities, they're the source of power for tomorrow. The youth, they're the powerful agency for tomorrow and for the change. The boycott, I've been seeing also comments on the boycott. It's very important. It's very effective for the Zionist establishment to be shaken. And it's very important, again, to connect with Palestinians and to get first-hand stories, information from them in order to stand against the disinformation and misinformation that has been spread so far. Having more webinars, maybe bringing more Palestinians from diaspora and other places, connecting with other like-minded people around the world. Because as I said, and I'll continue to say it, this struggle is not for Palestinians only. It's for all of us. It's to liberate all of us. So I think this is the time for networks, for coalitions to get together. And I think finally, we have to understand, in order to serve justice, accountability should be first. I cannot move forward if I don't see justice for almost 50 family members that I have lost in Gaza. So first is justice, and second, we can talk about anything else, but Israel has to be held accountable. It has to pay what the price of the genocide that it conducted on Palestinians. Thank you.
Aditya, I think we should take the last two questions, the hands up.
Yes.
It's 7:45 now.
Yeah. Alaya, Asgar, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Thank you for
Can you
including
introduce
me.
yourself, please?
Sorry, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Wafa, for being the light in a place which is so looking so dark, and the social media kind of throws up images and instances which only tell us one side of the story. Sitting here in Mumbai, in India, very far away from all of this, hearing about all of this and hearing about resistance, I have just one simple question. While in the long run, all of this really makes sense, resistance makes sense, standing for yourself makes sense, what is it that is going to be done or is being done to really put an end to the massacres now? I mean, children and people who are not even connected to any of this. I mean, why should they be suffering at the hands of somebody else's decision to not have a court of law, to not have transparency, to not be heard, to not be visible, to not be talked about? So while we sit in our air-conditioned living rooms in different parts of the world and hear people converse about incidents and policies and decisions to be taken, what is it that people sitting there who are in power, hopefully, will do something about it, so that there is an instant solution where nobody can walk in and kill anyone. Nobody has a right to take food away from me. I'm sorry, I'm just extremely emotional about it.
I don't think this is a question for any Palestinian to answer.
Sure.
Actually, this is the question that we raise every second, and the Ghazawis, the Gazans, they raise every second. Why we're starved? Why the genocide is live streamed and everybody is watching and looking without putting a stop to it? Why do we have to starve? Why do we have to lose our loved ones? Why do we have to lose our homes? Why we're trapped in this big concentration camp? It's up to the governments. It's up to the US to impose. It's up to the world governments, but also it's up to us. It's not enough to do solidarity marches and sit-ins and artistic solidarity production. they mean a lot to us because we feel, we feel the solidarity, we feel we're not alone. But can all those impose on Israel to get one bottle of water to a thirsty child in? I don't think so. So actually, I'll join your voice and I'll ask the question to the world, why you're leaving Palestinians? And don't say we didn't know. You knew. You knew for 21 months. You knew. And you chose to close your eyes, ears, and also mouth, to be silent and be complicit. But those are the governments. Then the question would be to the masses, how to force your will on your governments. I don't have the answer. But for sure, you out there, you should have some sort of answer.
Absolutely. We have to ask our governments why they do not act, surely. Habiba, would you like to ask your question, please? Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So, Wafa, firstly, it was a pleasure listening to you and all the power, strength, and prayers to all the people, to you and all the people suffering in Gaza and Palestine. So, so my question is that I'm drawing from Professor Muzammil Ayub Thakur. He draws a very interesting parallel between Zionism and Hindutva. So he says that Zionism cannot succeed. It can never succeed because the people in Gaza, they know what's happening to them. They call it what it is, that they're not ready to give an inch of their land. So what Paulo Freire says calls duality of consciousness. There is no duality in the consciousness of the people of Gaza. However, he says that in India, Hindutva is succeeding because people in India, especially Indian Muslims, I would say, are not able to see the oppression that's happening to them. That's the victims that they are of the oppression. They're not able to see that. They're not able to see what's happening in Kashmir. So there's a duality of consciousness in the oppressed people of India. So it's a very interesting parallel that you draw. I would love to hear a reflection or an analysis of all of you. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe Achin, you would want to take that?
Well, yes, the Palestinians know what is happening to them, and they remain steadfast and determined, generation after generation, to fight. With regard to the Muslim population here, they know what is happening towards them. Yes, there may be a certain section that is, for practical reasons, say that look what is happening, therefore we better compromise and all. But they know what is happening. The problem, of course, here is that where is the alternative that they can see as to how to fight back successfully? That is what has to be created. The moment something like that takes place, you will find, but don't assume that they don't know what is happening. Even those sections who will align with they're doing it because they think that is the way in which they can somehow protect themselves in some way. They understand that. But so that is what I would say. In the case of Israel's brutality towards us such that there is no question. There is a small section, for example, in Gaza, which has come out against Hamas and which is being armed by Israel, but it's very, very small, tiny here. However, even in West Bank, you do have the Fatah, the PA, which also collaborates. So there are similarities and differences. I will not take up time in pointing out the similarities and differences between Hindutva and Zionism. That would lead me to speak for about another 20 minutes, which I'm not going to do.
Thank you. I think then that is all the questions we can take today. Let me, in the end, thank all the panelists, particularly Wafa, for taking time out and joining us. That among the various things that can be done, there is one initiative that you must be all aware of, the one of digital silence globally from 9 to 9:30 every day. I mean, simple things like that. If indeed the world just shut down, for half an hour, it would be a message. There is absolutely no doubt. We on the one hand, one understands that solidarity marches, webinars, etc., do not get that glass of water to the thirsty child. On the other hand, if we do not even begin with that, we get nowhere. And we have to begin with that. We have to work on our own systems which are permitting this. We have to fight our own regimes, not depend only on the Palestinian people to fight this, one of the gravest injustices happening in the world. As I said in the beginning, that if we do not fight for democracy elsewhere, if we do not fight for people's right elsewhere, the day that our rights are snatched away are not very far. So thank you very much, all of you, and in solidarity with you, Wafa, and thanking you again for joining us, Professor Vanaik, for enlightening us and sharing your views, and Professor is left, I think, at the moment. Thanks to all of you, for Professor Pasha, and thank you, Shabnam. We will now end the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.